So as we can see, today's class we will be learning directive principles of state policy, which covers Article 31, 36 to Article 51. So if you guys can remember, Part 1 of the Indian Constitution covers Article 1 to 4. Part 2, citizenship, covers Part 5 to 11. And Part 3, fundamental rights, covers Part 12 to Part 35. And now we have the DPSP, which covers Articles 36 to 51. We are going sequentially, okay? Now what you will be learning today is you will be able to explain the concept of directive principles of state policy, which I've just explained earlier, and you will also understand the constitutional significance of DPSP. You will also be able to classify the different directive principles of state policy, like I mentioned earlier, the socialist principle, the Gandhian principle, and the liberal intellectual principle, okay? Now you will also be able to analyze Articles 36 to 51. We will be taking every article very deep. You will also be able to explain major constitutional amendments, the various amendments that took place that made changes to the DPSP. And you will also be able to understand the landmark Supreme Court judgments. And lastly, we will try to compare DPSP with fundamental rights to help clarify the difference. Now, what are directive principles? These are simply policy guidelines for the state. These are instructions to the state on how to govern the country. Now, fundamental rights are, like I said, they are essential rights given to the Indians, given to the citizens of India specifically, and it can be enforced in the court of law, right? If your fundamental right is violated, it can be enforced in the court of law because it is explicitly mentioned that you have the right to life, you have the right to personal liberty, there's abolition of untouchability, right? Cultural and educational rights, and so forth. Whereas DPSP, Directive Principles of State Policy, these are simply policy guidelines or advice. These are advisory in nature, which means it cannot be enforced in the court of law. If the government doesn't fulfill one of the conditions, you cannot go to the court saying the DPSP says so and so and so. The government must be punished. The government cannot be punished. These are advisory in nature. It cannot be enforced in the court of law. Are we clear? So directive principle, its concerns are welfare state, to make sure that India becomes a welfare state and there's social justice and economic justice, and that there's good governance. And without policy guidelines, the state would not know what to do. Okay, so these are policy guidelines, and it also gives the state constitutional goals. Everything aligns with the Indian Constitution, the basic doctrine of the Indian Constitution. Why do we need DPSP? Again, for social justice, for economic justice, for equality, for human welfare, for balanced growth, for inclusive development. These are the 6 points that you can use in your mains examination. Now, we will not be, I will be giving you notes on this. Why do we need DPSP? But you need to try to inculcate the habit of writing in such a way that you only need to memorize the 6 points and you can explain it using your own words, because that's what you're going to need if you are to give your mains examination. Now, historical background. How DPSP evolved. Okay, how DPSP evolved. Initially, the Directive Principles of State Policy was contained in the Government of India Act 1935 as instrument of instructions. Okay, these were instructions given not to the Indians, but to the ones who ruled India during the time during 1935. Who ruled India? The Secretary of State for India, the Governor Generals, right? The Governor General of India and provincial Governor Generals. Instrument of instructions were instructions given to the leaders, okay, during the colonial period, the British leaders, on how to govern India in a good way. So they copied it in the Indian Constitution as Directive Principles of State Policy. Now, DPSP directs the state. Here, instrument of instructions directs the governor generals, or in other words, the viceroy. Okay, so it's the same, except it was during the British era, and after 1950, now instrument of instructions, then the instrument of instructions combined with the Irish Constitution. Okay, we copied some from the Irish Constitution, and in 1949 we adopted it in the Constituent Assembly, and it came into force in the year 1950. The Directive Principles of State Policy came into force in the year 1950 as part 4 of the Indian Constitution. Is that clear? I've given you a very short note. The Directive Principles were inspired by Instrument of Instructions in the Government of India Act 1935, and also drew inspiration from the Constitution of Ireland. The Gandhian principles. Now we have the Gandhian philosophy. The Gandhian philosophy. Now here, this is what the Gandhian philosophy is all about. The Gandhian philosophy emphasizes on village and its self-governance. Okay, the village should self-govern themselves, should have the power to govern themselves, and they should also be economically self-reliant, which means they need to have their own source of production, right, wherein they can rely on their own village for sustenance, and which brings about social justice, which brings about the participatory democracy, in which the members of the village that participate, just in the same way that the Gram Sabha is the entire village, right? They participate in the election of the Gram Panchayat, and in this way, there will be national development. That's what the Gandhian philosophy is about. So, after Gandhian philosophy, the first is Article 40, Gram Panchayat. So, we have the Gram Panchayat, we have the organization of village panchayats. In the organization of village panchayats, we have the Gram Panchayat, then we have local self-government, then we have people's participation, then we have decentralized governance, then we have grassroots democracy. Okay, so I will be explaining what these 5 points mean. Now in the Gram Panchayat, we have the local self-government, right? It forms a local self-government, the panchayat, and in the panchayat, the people participate actively, and since the people participate actively, including the leaders of panchayat, including the members of the village, it means that it is a kind of decentralized governance, which means centralized means the state government would control them. But since they are the ones handling the affairs of the village, it means the power is decentralized, power is given to them. Power shared, that's called decentralization. And in this way, there's grassroots democracy. So Article 40 talks about organization of village panchayats. There should be a village panchayat. Okay, it encourages the state to form village panchayat, and as a result of which, village panchayats were formed. Right, village panchayats were formed, and now panchayat is under Part 9A of the Indian Constitution, and municipalities is under Part 9A of the Indian Constitution. Okay, so you will learn about that later. The Indian government, they enacted the Panchayat Act and Municipality Act in the year 1992 as a result of Article 40. They followed the policy guideline of Article 40 and they enacted the Panchayat Act and Municipalities Act. And after which, the Panchayat and the municipality, they gained constitutional status. And ever since, it's been the same. Okay? So, it's the result of Article 40. And in Article 43, we have promotion of home-based business, cottage industries. Okay, it encourages industries based on individual and cooperative efforts in rural areas. So, cottage industry is very important. The government provides various schemes. We also have the MSME, micro, small, and medium enterprises. You can also take Mudra loan. Mudra loan, there's different sections of Mudra loan that you can take, and even if you cannot pay off the loan, the government will pay it off for you. That's Mudra loan. It is a government-backed loan, which is why it's very easy for the banks to give us, because even if we don't pay them back, the government is going to pay them back, right? So these are some of the schemes offered by the Indian government to promote cottage industries, home-based business. Okay. Next, we have Article 43B, promotion of cooperative societies. We have the Department of Cooperative. We have the Cooperative Department here in Nagaland as well. So, a few of my friends who got trained in PC last year along with me, they are working as inspector in Cooperative Department. Okay, so I used to watch the WhatsApp status a lot, and they would try to master the crowd, different SHGs, and they would give them advice on how to strengthen their group and so forth. It's very interesting, the different initiatives the Indian government is taking. So even in the village next to my village, which is Tamlo village, the cooperative society, they gifted one bus. Okay, the reason why they gifted the bus a few years back, 2 to 3 years back, was so that the village people would unite, would form a cooperative society. A lot of villagers, their main source of sustenance is to go to the field, right, and to cultivate rice. They had no means of transportation. So the cooperative society, they thought that it would be a very uniting act to provide them a bus, so that the people can unite together, right, and they can pay for the fuel. They don't have to pay for the transportation. They just have to pay for the fuel. So even if you go very deep into the forest, you just have to pay maybe 20 to 30 rupees to cover the cost of the fuel. Okay, so these are different initiatives taken even by Nagaland state government, okay, for the promotion of cooperative societies. And they also provide funds to various self-help groups. Even NABARD provides funds for cooperative societies. There are different cooperative societies with some of them with cultural goals, but a lot of them with economic goals, right? For financial benefit, mutual financial benefit. I think girls, you guys play a lot of. There's this financial game called round pay, right? Round pay. So every month 1,000. Usual turn I work. Now if there's 12 of you, 1,000 each every month. Collect grow 12,000 which over. Our ek moina de action get you second moina de action get round the. That's also a kind of cooperative society. Okay, people pulling in their resources for a common cause. Okay. Now Article 45, early childhood care and education. Article 45 talks about early childhood care and education. Here we have the birth, we have the early childhood care, we have the preschool education, school readiness, and formal education, right? That's how the progress of a child is. Now, it was modified by the 86th Constitutional Amendment Act. In the original text of Article 45, what did we have? It provided free and compulsory education for all children until they reach 14 years of age. 14 years of age. Now, why did they change it in 2002 to below 6 years of age? Can anyone answer? Because in the original text, as you can see, until they reach 14 years of age, free and compulsory education. But in 2002, they changed it to below the age of 6 years. Why? Because for children between 6 to 14 years, it was shifted to fundamental rights. We studied about Article 21A, right to education. Right? In fundamental rights, right to education, yesterday we studied that Article 21A provides free and compulsory education for children between 6 to 14 years of age. So DPSP wasn't enough, and which is why they shifted the free and compulsory education for children between 6 to 14 years to fundamental rights. And now DPSP just contains early childhood care and education for children below the age of 6 years. Okay, it's very interesting, right? If they need a little bit more force, fundamental rights at holiday. So that's Article 45. Now Article 46, we have the promotion of educational and economic interests of weaker sections. Article 46, we have promotion of educational and economic interests of weaker sections. Weaker sections means we have the SC, we have the ST, and the OBC below the creamy layer that we talked about. These are all weaker sections of the society. So Article 46 talks about educational advancement of the weaker sections, the economic development, and social protection, okay, from injustice and exploitation, and which is why the government enacts various laws to help protect the minorities and, let's say, child labor and so forth. So Article 46, not much explanation needed. And Article 47, again, it directs the state, it directs the government to ensure nutrition, proper public health, and prohibition of drugs and intoxicating drinks, except for medicinal purposes. Okay, which means actually, according to Tiger principles, alcohol shouldn't be allowed. Okay, it's one of the Gandhian principles. Gandhi was vehemently against alcohol. He was very vehemently against alcohol and drugs. So this is also categorized as a Gandhian principle. To improve public health, to improve nutritional standards. For improving the nutritional standards, we have the Social Welfare Department. Okay, Ministry of Women and Child Development. We have the central ministry, and then in the state we have the social welfare, and then the different officers, the district welfare officer, the district program officer, or the child development project officer. These are officers under social welfare, and they have various schemes such as Poshan Ma, Poshan Abhiyan. Okay, Poshan Ma is about providing nutrition to mothers, especially lactating mothers, and then we have the Poshan Abhiyan that provides free training to children and so forth. Okay, we have the Anganwadi centers, which are all under social welfare department. So they take charge of ensuring nutritional standards in rural areas. Have you guys come across Anganwadi centers in your respective villages? Right, we have they provide different nutritional foods such as balpok, and I think what is that, Abhinav biscuit, right? Abhinav biscuit. Even my dad used to work in social welfare department, okay, and he would bring home the cartons of Abhinav biscuit. But back then we used to get cornflakes. So the cornflakes, it was very appetizing. But such is life, right? Whatever you have in plenty, you tend to overlook it, you tend to not value it, and I didn't value cornflakes, and now you damu je silo cornflakes to. So they the social welfare department is the department in charge, okay, in Nagaland, with regards to providing nutrition to the public. And now we have Article 48, agriculture and animal husbandry. Article 48 encourages scientific agriculture while preserving valuable livestock. Now, you look at it, scientific agriculture, that's understandable. Scientific agriculture, we can talk about PT cotton. I think we discussed it in the pre-foundation module. Genetically modified cotton to maximize its growth, and also to make it resistant to pests, right? To pesticides. scientific agriculture, that's one. Modern animal husbandry, that's another. Sustainable farming, that's another. And when it comes to sustainable farming, it talks about a kind of farming that's sustainable, which means long-term planning, right? Long-term planning. And breed improvement, we have different, we have hybrid animals, a lot of hybrid animals, breed improvement, and different sorts of, different ways in which breed of cattle and so forth, they're improved. And we have protection of milch and drought cattle. Okay. Now, talking about protection of milch and drought cattle, milch means any kind of cattle that provides milk. Okay, any kind of cattle that provides milk. Now, what can you think of an animal that provides milk? Cow, right? Cow. So, Article 48 explicitly mentions that cows must be protected. Do you think it comes from a religious perspective? Because Hindus, right? It doesn't come from a religious perspective, okay? It doesn't come from a religious perspective. It may be, that may be the case, but you cannot write that in your examination, okay? Religion da ahena lage. It's simply for the protection, for the promotion, right? To make sure that animals are not tortured and so forth. You should only write about that, okay? So we have come to the end of the Gandhian principle. A quick revision: Article 40, Panchayats; 43, cottage industries; 43B, cooperative societies; 45, early childhood care; 46, weaker sections; 47, public health; 48, agriculture and animal husbandry. Okay, all these are very well connected with Gandhi's philosophy. Okay, very well connected with Gandhi's philosophy. Next, we have the last, liberal intellectual principles. Now here we have Article 44, 48A, 49, 50 and 51. We will be studying about them one by one. Now Article 44, very important, okay? Article 44, you should stamp it inside your head. Article 44, very important, uniform civil code. It's one of the most intensely debated topic, okay, across the entire nation. Uniform civil code, which means uniform laws. It could be anything: cultural laws, it could be educational laws, it could be economic laws, any kind of laws, but uniform civil code. India has always tried to push for uniform civil code, but since India is a land of diversity with different religions, with different cultural backgrounds, it's very difficult to implement uniform civil code. Okay, the only exception is Goa. Goa has had uniform civil code for, I think, more than 200 years. Okay, because it was during when the Portuguese, they controlled Goa, they introduced the Portuguese uniform civil code, which still exists to this day. Okay, in matters related to marriage, divorce and so forth, not everything. And Uttarakhand was the first state to implement the uniform civil code, but it's just limited to marriage, divorce, admiralty and so forth. Very minor cases, issues. Okay, and even then, even for that divorce, marriage, even for those narrow topics, the public is against it. So who knows? Even uniform civil code that was introduced in Uttarakhand, it might not last very long. So it's very difficult to implement uniform civil code here in India because of the nature of India as very diverse. Okay. Article 44 still directs the state to endeavor to secure a uniform civil code for all citizens, but till today it's been impossible, and I feel like it will continue to be impossible. Okay, it's very difficult to implement uniform civil code here in India. But in Article 44, you have to understand that it's not talking about everything. It's related only to civil matters. Civil matters such as marriage, divorce, inheritance, and adoption, not religious beliefs or worship. Okay, you have to understand that when we talk about uniform civil code, we're talking about marriage, divorce, inheritance, and adoption, not religious beliefs or worship. Now, understanding the uniform civil code. For example, I just gave you a table. I just made a table for you guys. to understand what uniform civil code is. For example, we have religion-specific civil laws, right? Religion-specific civil laws. Now, it's not a religious law; it's a civil law. Civil law. What is a civil law as Christians here? Nagaland. Forget about religious law. What is a civil law here? What is a law that's civil but influenced by our Christian belief? One very good example is that Sunday is considered a holiday. Okay, that's a civil law. Okay, influenced by our religious belief. Now, Uniform Civil Code says common civil law for all citizens. So maybe Sunday might be considered not a holiday. Who knows? By UCC standards. Or marriage, let's say. We have different marriage laws. Nagaland to kuch bhi chalta hai, na? So many marriage laws kana je. Kun ki huwa se na puche. Mon bhi kina shadi bole se na jane. Kumba church the people who I forget, that's very private. Common marriage laws for everyone, and then divorce, common divorce laws, inheritance, common inheritance laws, rules. Again, inheritance be. Kumba tribe can do, I think the house, right? The youngest, they inherit the property and so forth. For a lot of villages, okay. Whereas for some of the other tribes, the eldest, na, aru kumba do ama baba kun sai udu lowo, na. So different inheritance laws. So it talks about common inheritance rules, and I think we also need to codify the different customary laws here in Nagaland. Kile gole do Twitter tribe chakar gole kun la law lowo, na udu issue bi ulai do. So Nagaland bitor tak tibi ekta common law mo naga mone accept kro parala. Kro na pare do, na. Mola time de paru, I have hope, okay, in our generation, but mola ama bola generation do, it's very impossible. Down to nichor la customer law karne, na, bura baba khan la generation ba ahala law ase, protect it at all costs. Down to na mon ki grow paru. So we have to. Time is the only thing that can solve. So even for Nagaland, we need a common law, okay? We need a common law, customary law. Adoption, common adoption laws. Again, adoption law very different, right? Kumba tribes kando sob mane adopt kure, aro nichola tribe la nam khan de. Whereas for some tribes, the citizenship diole do bishi diktar ase. For example, for Pom community, right? It's very difficult for someone to get citizenship as a Pom community. Okay, it's very difficult. I know personally of a family who's been a part of the culture for more than 40 plus years, and Indian citizenship na pai. Students can be strongly protest kore to protect our identity, to protect our culture and so forth. Okay, which my personal opinion do Article 48A, we have the protection of environment. Okay. We have the protection of environment, forest, wildlife, sustainable development, biodiversity, ecological balance. I don't need to explain that, you understand. Article 48A, protection of environment. Again, it was inserted by the 42nd Amendment Act. So a lot of DPSPs were inserted by 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, okay? Which is why the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act is also known as the mini Constitution of India. It is a very important point for your preliminary examination. You're likely going to get asked this question 1 out of 5 times. Okay, every 5 years, which constitution is known as the mini Constitution of India? 42nd Amendment. 42nd Amendment, sob jagade aahe na. 42nd Amendment, you have to remember it very clearly. Now, environment in the Constitution, duty of the state, Article 48A talks about the duty of the state, and Article 51 AG talks about the duty of citizens. Now, to protect the environment. Explanation not needed here. Again, Article 49, protection of monuments. Everybody knows what a monument is. So Article 49 talks about protection of monuments. It could be archaeological sites, sites of national importance, cultural heritage, historic buildings. And what are some of the monuments that we have here in Nagaland? What are some of the monuments that we have in Nagaland. The Kachari ruins, right? The Kachari ruins in the supermarket. Pitore Imgong London Kusade. We have the Kachari ruins. Okay. We also have the China and Itipen Memorial. Right. We also have the China and Itipen Memorial. We also have some cultural sites in Rukroma village, and these are sites of importance here in Nagaland. We also have the Chui village in Mon district, right? Ito skulls kan bisi thagala kusina Chui village. Ito bi ase. So we protect those monuments just in the same way the Indians they protect monuments. Tahalado ekdam mucha mucha je temples kana je palaces and all that. Now Article 50. Article 50, separation of judiciary from executive. Now, you understand, right, why Article 50 comes under liberal intellectual principle. Separation of judiciary from executive, it's a modern approach. Okay, it's an intellectual approach because they understand that sometimes the executive can influence the judiciary. So they're trying to separate the judiciary from the executive, which is, who are the executive? Modi ji as the executive to. Our President of India, Prime Minister as a, and his Council of Ministers kind of executive, very powerful people. So separation of judiciary from the executive means the judiciary, they function independently and they give judgments neutrally without the influence or pressure of the ruling government. So Article 50 directs everyone and tells them that judiciary though it's separate from executive. You guys have no power. You guys have no right to pressure them. That's a directive principle. Okay. So executive separately administration, law enforcement, government functions, and judiciary independent courts, justice, rule of law. Very separate. So Article 50 separates judiciary from executive. This can also be asked in your NPSC preliminary examination. Okay. Article 50 is very important. Next, I think this is one of the, we are coming to the end of the presentation. Article 51 talks about the promotion of international peace and security. Again, it directs the state to promote international peace and security, to maintain friendly relations, to conduct bilateral, multilateral. Bilateral means relations between two countries. I talked about that. Multi means more than two. Okay. To maintain good relationship with neighboring countries and so forth, which is why they conduct a lot of military exercises as well, joint exercises, India-Bangladesh military exercise, India-US military exercises and so forth. And we also have the BrahMos missile. Bra means Brahmaputra, Mos means Moscow, okay, the capital of Russia. It's a joint effort by India and Russia. They developed a supersonic missile called BrahMos missile. So these are some initiatives taken by the Indian government to ensure friendly relations with different countries. Article 51 encourages the government, the state, to promote international peace and security, and try to minimize involvement in international conflicts. So we see the case of Ukraine versus Russia. India did not interfere too much. We also see the war in Israel, the Israelites versus Palestine, and we did not get involved much in that war as well. So we always try to minimize our participation, okay, to promote international peace and security. We always try to maintain neutrality. Now a quick revision. In the liberal intellectual modern principle, okay, modern principle, we have the Uniform Civil Code, which is modern, which is intellectual, which is liberal. We have the environment, we have the monuments, we have the independent judiciary, and 51 international peace and security. These are the 5 points that come under liberal intellectual principles, okay? So a complete revision, you can screenshot it. When you watch the video on YouTube, you can screenshot it and you can save it. This is a very good way of categorizing, good way of memorizing, okay? So very important point, classification is not mentioned in the Constitution. Okay, it is mentioned chronologically, sequentially in ascending order, but we have classified it into the three different principles. And I think initially when I started my NPC journey, I used to study it in ascending order without classifying it, okay? But in your mains examination, there's a very good chance that they're going to ask you about the socialist principles in DPSP. So it's better that next time change Kuala Baldo, you study it separately into as three distinct categories, okay? It'll be easier for you to memorize, and you don't have to go back and again change the way you study. From the beginning itself, it's better you study it category wise, okay? So constitutional amendments affecting DPSP. We talked about the 42nd Amendment, which added a lot of articles, 39A, 43A, 48A, and 44th Amendment, right? It strengthened the welfare philosophy. 86th Amendment, we talked about 86th Amendment of 2002, which removed that 14 years law and added it into fundamental rights as Article 21A, right to education. So Article 21A is under fundamental rights. It provides free and compulsory education to children between 6 to 14 years of age. Okay. Now Article 45 of the DPSP only mentions care and education for children below 6 years of age. 6 to 14 though fundamental rights legislation. Do not forget that. Now let's understand the difference between fundamental rights and DPSP. Okay. Fundamental rights is a political democracy, and directive principles is a social and economic democracy. Now, this part 3 and part 4 form the conscience of the Constitution. What is conscience? It's a part of your mind that tells you what is right or what is wrong, right? Our ability to understand what is right and what is wrong simply means, simply is a definition of conscience, okay? So part 3 and part 4 forms the conscience of the Constitution. They complement each other. Now, if you take a look at fundamental rights, political democracy, it gives us political rights, okay? It gives us political rights, but our social and economic rights are mentioned in directive principles of state policy. We talked about the socialist principles, wherein there are lots of social and economic ideals that are meant to be followed by the state to implement, right? It is true the DPSP that they implemented MGNRGA, they provided subsidies and so forth, not through the fundamental rights. Fundamental rights, they give us political rights, political protection, okay? So political democracy, the existence of political democracy is impossible without social and economic progress, right? So fundamental rights and DPSP, they go hand in hand. Now, fundamental rights, mostly negative obligation, right? It directs a state not to interfere in the affairs of the citizen, right? The state shouldn't do this and that. Negative obligation, specials though, fundamental rights though. Negative obligation, which means directly protecting the state, protecting the citizens, right? You have the right to this and that. You have the, but positive means state can't get protect though. Negative means one get direct protect as a fundamental rights, na? So usually it's negative fundamental rights, so one get direct protect rate. Whereas DPSP though, positive as a state can't get one get protect more like economic situation, more like social situation, improve creativity. Okay, that's the difference. Individual centric, like I said, fundamental rights, even individual centric, right to equality, right to freedom of religion, so forth. Very individual. But DPSP, society centric. Not much explanation. Fundamental rights enforceable, right? If they violate your fundamental right, you can approach the court for the enforcement of fundamental rights through the 5 writs: habeas corpus, mandamus, prohibition, certiorari, quo warranto, right? We discussed about that yesterday. But DPSP is not enforceable, okay? It's not enforceable. The courts, they protect in fundamental rights, the 2 courts, Supreme Court and the High Court, they protect you, whereas DPSP, state can't implement correct. Okay, so Supreme Court and High Court, these are the only 2 courts that protects fundamental rights. it's mentioned in the Indian Constitution that the Parliament has the power, the extended power, okay, of issuing the writs, protecting the fundamental rights to courts lower than the Supreme Court and the High Court, but they haven't done it yet. As of now, only the High Court and the Supreme Court has the power to enforce fundamental rights. Do not forget that. This is a very important point, okay? Do not forget that. Only the Supreme Court and the High Court have the power to enforce fundamental rights. Now, this is the evolution of the relationship. The Supreme Court gradually moved from conflict between fundamental rights and DPSP to harmonious interpretation of fundamental rights and DPSP. Now let's look at the Champakam Torai Rajan case in 1951. Here, you don't need to understand the background. You just need to know that there was a conflict between fundamental rights and DPSP in that particular case. Okay, in that particular case, and then the Supreme Court held that fundamental rights prevail over DPSP, which means fundamental rights is above DPSP. Okay, in that case, in the state of Madras versus Champakam Dorai Rajan case 1951, that was what the Supreme Court decided. Now in the Golagnas versus state of Punjab, the Supreme Court held that Parliament cannot amend fundamental rights. Amend grown up change grown up. Okay, so the Parliament again passed the 24th Constitutional Amendment Act 1971 as a result of that case, which declared that the Parliament has the power to amend any provision of the Constitution, including fundamental rights, under Article 368. Eventually, okay, this triggered a constitutional debate on Parliament's amending power. Does the Parliament have the power to amend the Indian Constitution? Any provision goes, which means the preamble and the fundamental rights itself, the Parliament has the power to amend the Constitution. Inya Dishide, 1967 day. Now what changed in the Kesavananda Bharati case? Okay, as a result of what happened earlier in 1971, again there was public pressure and there were lots of debates, political pressure from the media saying that how can you give the Parliament the entire power to amend the entire Constitution? That would be autocratic. That's not democratic. That was the argument made, okay, by the press, the public, the intellectuals. Then came the Kesavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala 1973 case, in which the Supreme Court clarified that yes, the Parliament can amend the Constitution, the entire Constitution, but it cannot change the Constitution in such a way that the Constitution stops being democratic. The Constitution stops being republic. Okay, basic structure doctrine. They introduced the concept called basic structure doctrine, which means the basic feature of the Indian Constitution cannot be destroyed by the Indian Parliament. So that was the final decision made. Okay, and it also mentioned that fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy should coexist. It only said that, but the next case, Minerva Mills versus Union of India, 1980. Okay, 7 years later, that was the case when the Supreme Court clearly, explicitly mentioned the harmony between fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy. The Supreme Court held that Part 3 and Part 4 are complementary and together constitute the core of the Constitution of India, which means one isn't above the other. Okay, ekta la opor ekta na jawa, ekta la opor ekta na jawa. Now, looking back, see, in the 1951 case, fundamental rights prevail over DPSP. You know, I can ask this change. What do we understand from that? That even the Supreme Court, okay, they make mistakes, right? They're also human beings. Sometimes their judgments can be wrong, which is why the Indian Constitution, it has always evolved, okay, over time. Evolved quite again, also with the change in time, as well as with the understanding of the reality of India and so forth. First, the fundamental rights, but eventually they understood the importance of DPSP. And lastly, in 1980, they mentioned they mention the harmony between DPSP and fundamental rights. Now this is how the DPSP influence government policies. The directive principles, the principles will be used in the parliament to legislate, to pass a law and legislate, right? And once the government passes a law, it becomes government programs. And these government programs, it is a social welfare program, and it provides economic development to the community. Let's just say one of the directive principles of state policy is to uplift the economic status of the poor people, right? So what did they do in the parliament? They used that directive principle and they thought of an idea. They introduced MG Energy Act, okay? MG Energy Act, which is the implementation year is 2006. The legislative, they legislated it in the Legislative Assembly, and then the government program, it became a government program, and then for the social welfare, they implemented it across the entire nation, and which led to economic development. MG Energy, Midday Meal Scheme, Right to Education, National Food Security Act, Legal Services Authority, everything, all of these were inspired by directive principles of state policy. Okay, so whatever policies the government make, everything is on the basis of DPSP. Never forget that. So this is the mind map that you can screenshot once you're home and once you're studying, and you can memorize it that way. Mind maps, they help, okay? They help. It's for better retention. And this is the main practice questions as well. You can go and check it out. Check out the video, and then you can try answering these questions, okay? You can try practicing these questions. Any question? We have come to the end of our discussion. So if anyone has any doubt, any question, you can let me know.